This is actually this feels harder than I thought it would do. I decided I would take the time to talk about me or my life, and I don't really kind of know where to start or what to put in or if to leave anything out. Well, there's one specific thing I'm definitely going to leave out, but the easiest thing to do really is just start at the beginning, really. I'm not talking about Asperger's at all. It's just really a rundown of my life from start till now, briefly. You all know my name. I was born in 1972. Earliest memories were probably as a toddler. Quite frankly, probably my earliest memories as a toddler was actually pooing myself, surprisingly enough. Being in a, vaguely remember being in a cot, which is quite surprising because most people don't have memories that stretch back that far. I went to a Roman Catholic primary school that was predominantly run by nuns. It was, I obviously not, that only being my only school, I don't actually have anything to compare it by, but I should imagine it was fairly strict. I was a bit of a rule breaker there because you were supposed to wear short trousers all the way through till you was a fourth year junior when you was sort of 10, 11 years old. And I constantly refused to do that and constantly wore long trousers. Don't particularly know the reasons why. I can't remember the reasons why now, but I just didn't like it. So I know I sort of went against the fold then. And one quite funny thing I do remember about primary school was the fact that being a Roman Catholic school, you was expected to go to church and stuff like that. And by the time I was 6 years old, I generally speaking had basically just stopped going. And I remember the school actually threatening to expel me because I wasn't going to church, and that the actual Essex Education Council actually told them that they cannot discriminate against a child for his or her religion. So that kind of blew up in their faces, threatening that one. Anyway, I had, relatively speaking, quite a happy childhood at home. We come from the poorer end of society. My father was crippled with arthritis at a very early age, and I don't really remember him working at all. Any car we had would have been like an old Zephyr or Zodiac or something, which was a car that wasn't bought. It was a car that was actually left at the property with my parents. Bought the property back in the 60s. We had the typical 1970s pudding bowl haircuts, just straight round. My hair was cut by my mother, so my brothers and my sister. So we kind of, as the late 70s took hold and people started becoming more affluent and you had a lot more middle earners, people started having package holidays and stuff, I started getting singled out probably around about 6, 7 years old for being different, for want of another term. And the thing that sticks in my memory that I know has had an effect through my life was, for whatever reason, during my early junior years, like first year, second year junior, there was one girl and her little sheep follower. And I know this sounds stupid because, kids are kids and we were all exceptionally young. But they started calling me Fleabag, and I remember that all the other girls basically, whenever you get a bully, you either go with them or you abstain from any opinion. So you generally stay quiet, or you actually join them. So basically all the girls in my class were either joining this particular young girl, or none of them actually ever spoke to me for fear of being bullied themselves. So I spent the whole of my junior school years, 4 years, being called things like Fleabag and stuff like that, until I left, basically. Now, my home life at that period, we didn't have computer games back then in the 70s. I mean, I remember my eldest brother actually got one of the very early computer games, which you had bars that used to run up and down the side of the screen, and a square blob would bounce backwards and forwards, and they'd call it tennis, and it was like amusing for about 5 minutes. And then myself and my middle brother Joe would sooner go out and play in the back garden on an old door, rocking on an old crate and pretending it's a boat in the middle of the sea and we're being capsized, and imaginative games like that. So yeah, we would sooner go around building camps and that sort of thing, rather than and always have been that way inclined, rather than actually I've got an old gentleman coming towards me, which is really a little bit annoying. So yeah, we would sooner do that sort of thing rather than, I think if modern games were around, I still would have been that way inclined. Now, I quite early on actually started hanging around with older local children who went to different schools. Older in some cases, some of them were like 5 or 6 years older than me. So when I actually started secondary school, I knew people in the last year, and I knew quite a lot of people in the last year, so the 5th year and the 4th year and the 3rd year. So I generally didn't hang around with people my own age. 1 or 2 people through my secondary school years I used to hang around with. One person in particular, a really good friend, and I know he's following this actually, funny enough. He lives in Canada now, Mark Elsey. His dad was actually a school teacher at my secondary school, Swain School in Rayleigh in Essex. So I spent most of my time hanging around with the older kids, and my home life was fairly much the same, hanging around with the older kids. But the problem there lies is, being as the younger, I was also the one that was not always bullied, but if they were to bully, I would be the one that would cop it. So I went from being, I'm not sure it's ostracised is the right word, I'd have to look up that definition, but basically being bullied by all the girls in my junior school, to being bullied by my friends throughout my secondary school life by being called Jippo. And that was because, again, hair was cut by my mother, we wore hand-me-down clothes, we never had any money because my dad didn't work. I used to get school dinner tickets. We never went on holidays like other people. We didn't have modern posh cars like other people. So there has always been a slight envy of money basically, and I always swore that I would make my own way in life, and if I had children, way back then I thought if I ever had children, I would not let my child go through the same thing. Now I have actually got a child, and he's 5 years old, and although because of the crap relationship I had with my own father, which I think spurs on a disassociation between myself and my own child, and I do find it hard to associate with my own child. I love him very dearly, and I would move heaven and earth to give him whatever he needed, so he was never bullied like I was. And I know it's the wrong thing to do. Kids these days seem to think they've got to have the latest technology or got to have the latest trainers and stuff like that. But realistically, if that's what it takes to stop him going through the same shit that I did, I will do it. There's no two ways about it. I would definitely do it. So yeah, because I got terribly bullied in my junior school by the girls, I didn't really liked to associate with the girls in the secondary school. And as I've just said, I generally hung around with the older kids, which were all male friends. And I generally didn't have anything to do with girls until I was pretty much forced to when I was in the 5th year, so I'm talking now 15, 16 years old. The only girls that I ever really had any association with when I was growing up through my sort of 8, 9, 10, 11 years old were a few locals around the area who were on the same social scale as us. And as it turns out, as we got older, we realised that they were actually, funnily enough, one or two of them turned out to have been actually abused children. So, not that that really has any relevance, but you know, I think that there was a lot more, or there's a lot more abuse than people realise back in those days. There were some things that happened to me when I was younger, but that's not open for discussion. So when I got into my late teens, still didn't really sort of understand the female half of society, and that's also a reason why I'm actually quite against single-sex schools, because I've seen the basically the inability from guys that have been at single-sex schools to actually know how to communicate with girls of their own age, because they don't have any social interaction. So I'm totally against single-sex schools. Just thought I'd put that out there. So yeah, it was only when I was in my latter years at school I actually started having the first few girlfriends, and I remember being deeply embarrassed when I actually had to admit to one of them, because I wouldn't have a girl come around my house, because they couldn't understand why we didn't have hot running water out of the taps, because, you know, gas central heating had been around for years by that point, and everyone had gas central heating, and yet in our house the radiators were cold. In the winter we had a paraffin heater in the living room, because our parents couldn't afford the oil to fire the boiler. If you wanted to shower, it would be sort of like once a week, and you'd have to turn the immersion on and wait for the tank of water to warm up, and then you could have a shower, and it'd be as quick as possible because we're all supposed to have a shower with the same tank of water. So yeah, it was, you know, there's a lot of people watching this who can relate to that, because that's the way things were way back. But I was at the age where there was a change in society, and that wasn't the norm. So people that knew this would pick fun at it, and it was deeply embarrassing for me to have a girlfriend and try and explain why I wouldn't want them coming around my house, especially when they sort of, you know, their initial reaction is, "Ugh, you haven't got hot water." So yeah, it was hard. It was quite hard to interact with girls for me, because of my bullying from girls, and because of the way we was brought up, and the way our household was still at that point in my life. Now, I mean, you know, what one thing that was annoying, that I was quite outspoken as a teenager, and because I never had a very good relationship with my father, I used to actually openly say, why is it, because he used to grow orchids and stuff in a greenhouse. Now he would pay for the oil for the boiler that would heat the greenhouse to keep these tropical orchids heated, but he wouldn't pay for the oil to heat the home. And I remember actually sort of losing my rag one night and blatantly saying, why do you treat us like this, when you treat, you know, the sodding plants in the greenhouse much better? So yeah, clearly I didn't have a very good relationship with my father, and I didn't actually realise how much that played a part in my life until he actually died in '97. and I was quite cut up at his funeral. It was the first time and the only time I've ever been cut up at a funeral, not that I've been to many, where, sorry, some people walking past, kind of distracts you. Yeah, it was only at his funeral that I realised that I had a deep sense of loss, that I'd never had that sort of relationship, which is one of the reasons, actually, many years later, when I actually got married, that I struck up such a good, close, or I felt that I did anyway, a good, close, strong relationship with my wife's or girlfriend's father. I kind of adopted him as a surrogate father, if you like, and I don't think he knew that, but yeah, I really enjoyed having good conversations with him. But anyway.